Hey, good morning, Prayer Heights. How awesome is it to be here this morning? Woo, all right, I'm glad we got some people excited. I'm Doug. I'm that guy that made on World Introvert Day. They got an introvert to come up here and give the welcome. So that's a great start to my day. And as we jump into the message today, it's going to get a little bit deeper than that. It wasn't just about Janelle getting up here on World Introvert Day. It was about Janelle leaning into what God had for her and what her purpose here on earth is. And you'll get to hear more about that. And as I was thinking about Janelle when she was up here talking a little bit about her story, I just started reflecting just a little bit and just thinking, hey, it's just 2022. We just celebrated Christmas. We had the holidays. It was awesome. It was so much fun to be here with everybody with our Christmas services. And then we had a week off. And in Christmas, it was a little bit different for me this year. And it started all back in Kid Venture, as odd as that may sound. Kid Venture did a party with Jesus. And for me, for some reason, that just struck me, and I hadn't thought about it that way, is all the birthday parties that I've gone to, for me, those are the fun ones, right? But all those birthday parties, and that really Christmas is Jesus' birthday party, and celebrating this. He was born just like you and I were. He walked on this earth just like you and I did, and he died just like you and I are going to do someday. You know, it just made it a little bit more real for me, and it was just awesome. Then we had last Sunday off. We missed all of you, and I don't know what you did, but I ate way too much. But then I also started having conversations, and one of the conversations I had was with a guy, and we were talking about, hey, 30 years ago, do you know what 30 years ago? It was 1992, 30 years ago, and people my age, you're just like, oh, that doesn't seem like it was 30 years ago. And then he kicked me in the shin a little bit more because he's reminding me that was 30 years ago, and then he's like, hey, do you know what's going to happen in 8 years? It's going to be 2030. In 8 years, it's going to be 2030. Wrap your mind around that one. But back in 1992, 30 years ago, I was a freshman in college, and I had my whole life in front of me, and I'll tell you what, it went by like the snap of my fingers. All of a sudden, I got a wife, and I got a dog, and I got 4 kids, and a mortgage, and all that stuff going on. I'm like, what happened to me? You know, here I am. And that's what this series is all about. And let's just watch this video. Watch this video for me, and it'll help set the stage for this morning.
He slips before the bag, then slips again. And that prevented one run from scoring.
I mean, we're laughing, but how often do we feel like that in our life? We're going somewhere so fast. We know where we want to get. We're going so fast, and we fall down. And then we get up. We don't even think about it. We just start running fast again, and we fall down again. And I think too often we all live like that. And that's why we want to take a minute. We want to take a minute and see where we want to be a year from now, where we want to be 5 years from now, where we want to be 25 years from now. And as we dive into the Take a Minute series, this week we're talking about legacy and purpose. Next week we're going to talk about dreaming. And then in week 3 we're going to align our values and lean into what God has for us and be able to maybe make some action steps out of that as we continue our life here on earth. Now you know the why of what we're doing. We're going to talk a little bit about the how of what we're doing. And I want to start off with a Bible verse. And I want to give you some context before we dive into the Bible verse. And we're going to jump into Jeremiah. In Jeremiah, the Bible in some ways is letters that people wrote, and then they got put into this book. So Jeremiah, it's in the Old Testament, so that means it was before Jesus was born. So we're back in the Old Testament, and Jesus is writing a letter to these leaders that have been exiled to Babylon. So they're leaders that are in Babylon, and he's trying to give them some hope and some direction and share the words that God's put on his heart. So we're going to go Jeremiah 29:11. And in this letter, Jeremiah is trying to give them some direction that's for them and some immediate direction. The immediate direction was pray for the people that are holding you captive. How hard is that one? The second one is this, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope in the future. That's what God has for you. That's what God has for me. It's what he has for me and you. He's got plans for us. He's got hopes for us. And he doesn't want to harm us. He wants to prosper us. And so then you start to think, okay, well, how do I tap into these plans? How do I tap into what God has for me? And it's a simple but not easy first step. The first thing that you have to do is you have to begin with the end in mind. You have to begin with the end in mind. What does that look like? You have to start thinking about what you want it to look like at the end. It's just like Google Maps on your phone. It'll tell you where you're at right now, but if it doesn't have a destination in it, you're not going to go anywhere. Just like that. So beginning with the end in mind, and it's not the easiest thing to wrap your head around, but I'll tell you this. Every single one of us at some point is going to die. There might be a funeral. There might be a celebration of life. And at that celebration of life, at that funeral, people are going to summarize your life in just a couple sentences. They're going to talk about you. You're not going to be there, but they're going to talk about you. And they're going to talk about how you lived and what you did. And the first step, beginning with the end in mind, is what do you pick those sentences? What do you want people to say about you? At your funeral, what do you want people to say about you? What do you want your obituary to say? It's just like Google Maps. If you don't put in the destination, you're never going to get there. So how do you start thinking about and getting there? And so I want to share a couple examples with you that I think work pretty well. So there's a guy in 2015. His name was Doug. And unfortunately, he passed away. But Doug, he decided what his obituary is going to say. He lived his life that way. And I appreciate that. I mean, check out his obituary. Doug Legler. Doug died. Right? You go back and we laugh and we chuckle, and you know what? If we go back and you read some of the articles, this became a national news story. You go back and you read some of those articles, and it talked about people saying, he was a lighthearted, fun-loving prankster. He loved people. And at some point, Doug Legler decided that's what he wanted to be known for. That's who he was. That's what he did. And there's more to it than that. But what I appreciate about Doug died, his name is longer than his obituary. But he picked it on purpose. It wasn't an accident. Somebody else didn't write that. Doug picked that. And that's what we want for you. We want you to pick. Pick your sentences. Pick them now. Some of you might not know this. I've only worked at Prairie Heights for 8 months. It's my first month. I did not come from a church setting at all. And so all of a sudden I'm working in a church, and this guy comes up to me. He's like, hey, I need to meet with you. I need to spend an hour with you. I'm like, what do you need to spend an hour with me for? And so I started asking him some questions. I'm like, hey, why do you want to meet? And then I asked him a question, and before he was done, I said, hey, Monday at 1 o'clock, come to my office. And this guy, he's got a few extra laps around the track on me. And he still has a lot of life left. But he wanted to meet with me so he could read his eulogy to me. He's written his eulogy. He's a Prairie Heighter. He knows he wants his funeral here, and he's written his eulogy, and he wanted to make sure we had it in our records. So when we have his funeral, that we've got his eulogy. And I just think about that. I think about, here's this guy. He's not close. I mean, it can happen at any moment, but he's got some laps around the track left. And he's writing down his eulogy, which means he knows what his path is. He knows what his course is. He knows where he's going. He knows what he wants to do. He knows what he's trying to do. And I just think, how awesome is that? He's my friend. I'm happy to say he's my friend now. But that's what I want for me. That's what I want for you. That's what I want for all of us, is to know where we're going. What does that look like? Let's pick it now. Let's not just let it happen, not let it happen on accident. So let's go back into the Bible. So there's this guy named Paul, and we're going to dive into some of the things that Paul shared. So Paul, he's the Apostle Paul, and I had to look up apostle because I wanted to make sure I got it right. So apostle means just a person that's sent. When the Bible talks about an apostle, it's just a person that's sent. And Paul was a person that's sent. And I think if we really think about it, we can all relate to Paul. So Paul, if you know much about Paul, he wrote 13 books in the New Testament. And he's known as one of the greatest influencers in the early church. You guys relating to that? Because I'm not. I'm like, oh, I'm not even sure I've read 13 books in the Bible. But there's this guy named Paul. And you got to know the rest of Paul's story. So Paul had a transformational experience with God, and he became Paul. But before he was Paul, his name was Saul. And some of you might know what Saul was famous for. Saul was famous for rounding up, finding, hunting down Christians and bringing them in to pay the price. That's what Saul did, and that's what Saul was famous for. And Paul had an experience. Something happened to him, and he became Paul. And he wrote 13 books in the New Testament, became one of the greatest influencers in the early church. I haven't rounded up anybody to persecute him, but I've done some pretty bad things, and it gives me hope knowing that God can take Saul and move him into Paul. So Paul, he's nearing the end of his life. He's in a Roman prison, and he's going to die. Not because he's sick, but he's going to die. And I think he's there, and he's writing a letter to this young guy named Timothy. And so Timothy's a pastor that Paul kind of took under his wing, and he's writing him a letter. And in my mind, I think it's like Paul's famous last words. He knows he's dying, and he's going to write a letter to somebody that loves and he cares about, and he's going to tell him stuff, right? And to make that maybe a little bit more real to you, I ask people a lot of questions because I want to learn from them. And I had Steve, he's a leader in the church here in our region, and I had him in my office. I'm like, Steve, hey, what would you tell your 18-year-old self that you know now? And Steve looked out at me. I could tell he's thought about it because it didn't take him long to answer. He goes, hey, I would have trusted God fully sooner. I mean, I trusted God, but if I could go back and do it over again, I'd trust God fully sooner. And so I kind of think it's like that. I kind of think it's like Paul trying to share the things he's learned so somebody else's path is just a little bit easier. So he writes a letter to Timothy. And we're going to go Timothy 4, and it's verses 7 and 8. So as we look at verses 7 and 8, starts off, for I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. Paul's saying, hey, my time is close. I'm going to die. Here's the part. I'm being poured out like a drink. I'm not saving what I have. I'm not holding it for later. I'm pouring out what I have. I've been poured out like a drink. We've all hit the bottom of a glass, the bottom of a coffee cup. Pouring it out, not saving it for later. Verse 7. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. What Paul's saying to Timothy is, I fought the good fight. Not I fought the perfect fight, or I fought a great fight, but I fought a good fight. Because Paul wasn't perfect. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I knew where I was going. And even though I only got there in a good way, it wasn't a perfect way, I finished the race. I got to the end. I knew where I was going. I had a destination in my Google Maps. I knew where I was going. The most important part, I've kept the faith. I've kept the faith. What's Paul saying to Timothy right there? What I think Paul's saying to Timothy, I fought the good fight. It wasn't perfect, but I kept trying, and I made mistakes. I finished the race. I knew where I was going, and I kept the faith. I kept my belief. And I come back to you and I say this. When you die, people will summarize your life in a single sentence. Pick it now. What's it going to be? Taking a breath. I mean, that's a heavy thought. You're going to die. Pick your sentence. How hard is that? And we're going to dive into that. Going to get into it a little bit today, and hopefully, some of you will walk out of here thinking about it. But before we get into that, we're going to take a break. We're going to take a break from the message because that's some pretty serious stuff. And when I started this, I thought it was going to be a little bit more fun. So let's have just a little bit of fun right now. Anybody in here, have you heard of Walgreens? Anybody Walgreens? Anybody know? Okay, good. Thanks for letting me know you're still awake there, because I'm making sure that everybody's awake. So we all know Walgreens, and it's on the corner of Happy and Healthy. And for me, I live in South Moorhead, and every day, literally every day of the week, I drive to Prairie Heights. So I go up 8th Street, and I always get stopped at the same traffic light. Get stuck there. So I'm sitting there, I notice, hey, there's a Walgreens over here on my left. Guess what's over here on my right? A CVS. So you got a Walgreens and a CVS, and that's pretty typical across the country. And I know that because I read it on the internet, just saying. And there's some social media memes about it. Hey, Walgreens on the corner of Happy and Healthy, and just across the street, CVS, right? It's true. Look it up. I'm not making it up. So why am I sharing this with you? Let's just imagine on that social media meme, instead of Walgreens, it says God. God on the corner of Happy and Healthy. What's going to be across the street? So this is the hard part. The devil's going to be across the street. And why am I sharing that with you? Because here's what's going to happen. Like I said, if I do a halfway decent job, and like 5 of you walk out of here, start thinking about what you want your legacy to be, and you start thinking about what your sentence wants to be, you know what's going to happen to all 5 of you? As soon as you start thinking about that, as soon as you start leaning into what God has for you, who's going to show up? And you're going to have this voice in your head that says, oh, you can't do that. Oh, that's not realistic. Here's why you can't do that. And I want you to be ready for that, because it is going to happen. Right now, that's just an idea. Let me make it real for you. I've known for a while I got to do the message today, and I've been trying to figure out what God had on my heart. I was praying and listening and spending time with God, and I finally got it. And so I needed to take it at some point. I needed to take it out of my head and put it on a piece of paper. And so I came up with the perfect plan. My son had basketball practice. I was going to drive him to basketball practice. I was going to come home. I was going to tuck him into bed. Then I was going to work out a little bit, get my blood pumping, right? Wake up. And then I was going to take what was in my head and put it on paper. I was going to lean into what God had for me and put it on a piece of paper so I could share it with you all today. So I do that. I'm working out. And you know what happened? I'm working out. And the show I'm watching while I'm working out, all of a sudden it became binge-worthy. I'm like, ooh, I don't want to stop now. So in my mind, I'm like, oh, okay, you don't want to be sweaty while you're writing the message. So, hey, let's just sit down, grab an ice cold cup of water, watch a little bit more till you stop sweating. So I did, and then I was like, ooh, when I was in the fridge, I'm like, that sparkling water, that looks really good. And so I grabbed a sparkling water, and one sparkling water turned into 2. And when I was grabbing the second one, I'm like, ooh, I'm kind of hungry, but I worked out, so I'm going to eat something nutritious. So I grabbed out a hard-boiled egg. And just like the sparkling water, those 2 hard-boiled eggs, all of a sudden, that one turned into 2. And when I was getting the second one, there was kind of a leftover meat and cheese plate in our fridge. I'm like, ooh, that looks pretty good. I'm going to have some meat and cheese. So by the time I demolished the meat and cheese plate, I'm like, ooh, you know what? Top this off, that leftover brownie on the counter. This is what the carnage looked like, sitting on my office floor. All of a sudden, it's 11 o'clock. I've eaten about 10,000 calories. I've binge watched Friday Night Lights. And I haven't gotten a single thing down on paper. So I cut my losses and I go to bed. So I go to bed, but I ate the brownie. All that sugar, it kept me awake. I couldn't fall asleep. So then I finally fall asleep. Then do you know what happened? Man, I drank all that water. Yep, woke up, had to go to the bathroom. So then I crawl back into bed, I fall asleep, and then before I know it, my 10-year-old, he romps into the room. He's ready to go. So up and at him we go, start the day, go to work, do all those things. I come home that next night, and I'm tired, and I made the mistake of sitting on the couch, and then kind of slouched on the couch. And the next thing you know, I'm full out taking a nap on the couch at 7 o'clock at night. That created some tension, if any of you ever done that. That does create some tension. And then I couldn't sleep again that night. And yeah, some of you are saying, Peters, those are bad decisions. Yep, I made some bad decisions. I get that. But I'm also very aware that I was trying to lean in to what God had for me, what God wanted me to do. And I got distracted by human desires. I think the devil showed up. That's a spiritual battle. And it goes on and on. I could talk about it for the rest of the time. But I just want you to be aware that spiritual battle is there. Where God shows up, the devil is going to show up. And the devil doesn't show up and say, hey, do you want me to cut off your right hand to your left hand? The devil shows up and says, hey, do you want that meat and cheese tray? Do you want some brownie? Do you want some eggs? Oh, you can have it all. And it all starts right there, and you start to get distracted. And I wanted to share that with you. Because it's going to happen. If you start thinking and leaning into what God has for you, the devil is definitely going to show up. Because at the end of the day, let's go back to Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope in a future. That's what God has for each and every one of us. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. The guy across the street doesn't necessarily want all that for all of us. And you got to be aware of it. So we're talking a little bit about purpose. We took a station break in there, and I'm sorry for all of you online that thought we got hijacked, our stream by CVS or Walgreens or whoever, but that was part of it. Now we're going to jump back and talk about our purpose. And what is our purpose? That's a hard thing to wrap our minds around. And I'll go back to Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you. I can't say that enough. God has plans for you. He has plans for each and every single one of you. He has plans for me. Are we going to lean into it or are we not? Let's decide. Let's pick. So, it took me about 4 years to put together what my purpose was. I was in a conversation, somebody brought it up, and I was like, oh, I should think about that. I was 35 at the time. It took me 4 years to figure it out. 4 years. It didn't happen overnight. And it probably took me another 14 years altogether to start to really live it out. And I was in a meeting, and it wasn't the meeting where I decided that Janelle should do the welcome because she's an introvert. It was a similar meeting, and I was with a couple people that help us with our social media and some things like that, and we got into the conversation of purpose, and I asked the woman that was in the meeting, I said, hey, what's your purpose? And she answered just like that. And I was like, she's 31. And I asked her shoe size, and she answered just like that. And at first, I was a little jealous. I'm like, hey, man, I wish I knew what my purpose was when I was 31 instead of a decade later. She's got a decade up on me. But then you know what I remembered? I remembered Saul to Paul. And then it's never too late. I mean, look at what Saul was doing and look at what Paul ended up with. And it turned my mind from, hey, I'm not 10 years behind. I'm right where God wants me. Let's lean in and let's see what God has for me. You know what makes me sad, though? Is I could poll every single person in this room, and just like that, you'd be able to tell me your shoe size. If I were to ask you, what's your purpose? I'd get it's kind of hard to put into words. And that's what I want for all of you, is at least to start to be able to put that into words. What's your purpose? What are you doing here? And maybe purpose and why is too big to wrap your mind around. So there's this awesome video that I want to show you right now that is going to give you the picture of living when you know your why and living when you don't know your why. So let's check out what my friend Michael Jr. has to say to us this morning.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country, and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director? Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a
That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I see.
Okay. Here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
See what happens when you know your why? There's a difference. There's a difference in that guy singing, and there's a difference in you and me when we're operating in what we do versus we're operating in why we do it. Like I said, it took me 4 years to figure out what my purpose was, and then another 10 years to actually live it out. So my purpose is to grow leaders for God. And how did I get there? What was the process like? It doesn't matter what the process was like. Each and every single one of us were fearfully and wonderfully made. Every single one of us is special and different. And so it's different for everyone. But I think there's a few things that I can share with you that'll help you figure out your why just a little bit. So the very first one is you have to think about what's important to you. Not what you like, but you got to focus on what you really care about. Now, I liked college athletics. I might have really cared about it. But on the other side of it, it's like deep down in here when I start thinking about growing leaders for God. I think my sister is a perfect example. She's a couple years older than me, 1,100 miles away, and she's super talented. She's on a career path like this. And then she really started thinking about what was really important to her. What was really important to her? She wanted to be a great mom, a great wife, and a great daughter. She's a stay-at-home mom. She takes care of the house and does things so her husband can do what his purpose is, interrupts her life all the time and really plans around her kids. And then when she has something planned for herself every now and then, trying to take care of my mom, she's got to break those plans too. She took time to figure out what was really, really important to her and what she really cared about. Because at the end of the day, she could have had a great career. She still might. But she knows she wants to be a great mom, a great wife, and a great daughter. Maybe not super glamorous, but still so important, living in her purpose. And she's like that second part of the song when you see her in her life. There's no doubt about that. So that's the first thing, is focus on what you really care about. Figure out what makes you cry, what makes you feel emotional. The second thing is find your friends. So I'm not talking about your spouse or your parents or people that you're related to, but who's that person that if something really bad happens or really good happens, you're going to text them. And you ask that person, hey, why are we friends? Why are you friends with me? And why, it's an emotion. Why is an emotion? So it happens in your brain that's in that emotional part. It's really hard to put it into words. So they're going to say something kind of vague. Why are we friends? Well, just because I've known you a long time. Well, in that long time you've known me, why do you keep hanging around me? And so you have to exhaust the whys and get to where it's at. And it's still not going to be quite right, and they're going to start to get a little frustrated. And then you have to ask them, well, what is it about me that you like? What makes us friends? What is that? And they're going to hem and haw through that, but they're going to get a little bit closer. And here's what's going to happen. And I've experimented with this multiple times. In fact, I did it last week. I'll tell you about it in just a second. But then they're going to start to tell you about the impact you have on them and how you add value to them. And when you get into that space, you're starting to get into the ballpark about what your purpose and what your why is. I had a colleague I tested this out on, and I'm like, hey, why do you love your husband? And she's like, what? I'm like, why do you love your husband? And at first, it was like we've been together for a long time. We like the same things, and we just kept narrowing it down. And at the end of it, she goes, I love my husband because he makes me a better person. That's how he adds value to her. And that's how you start to really begin to put some boundaries around what your purpose and what your why is. And as you're going through that, I'll share with you, we're talking about legacy and what you want people to say after you've been gone, and we're talking about what your purpose and what your why is right now. Another thing you need to know is those things, they kind of go hand in hand. Maybe it's not starting with one and ending with the other. Maybe it's backwards. Everybody's a little bit unique. Another great question you can ask yourself is, what do I want to be known for? Because maybe thinking about what your obituary is too hard. But what do you want to be known for? What is it that, when you think about it, what do you want to be known for? And then you come back around on the opposite side of it, and you go, what am I known for? And you ask, why is that important? And as you start asking yourself those questions, you're going to start to figure it out. It's going to become clear, and especially if you're spending some time with God and you're leaning into that, you're going to get some thoughts and some feelings about what your purpose is and about what your legacy is and what you want people to say about you at your funeral. You've got to do the work. You've got to ask yourself the questions. So here's your next steps. Really, really simple, not very easy. The first thing is you have to ask yourself the right questions. We went through the questions. Hey, what do I want to be known for? What am I known for? Hey, what do I want people to say at my funeral? Hey, what do I want people to say after I leave the table? What do I want to be known for? What is that? Where is my sweet spot? What does that feel like? You got to ask yourself the right questions. Not what do I like, not what makes me feel good, but what's really, really important to me. The second thing you got to do is you got to start right now. Because the best day to plant an oak tree was 30 years ago. The second best day is today. You have to start right now. Don't wait till you're good or you have the perfect plan. You just got to start. Because time is ticking. Just get started. It's not going to be perfect. And as you ask yourself the right questions, and as you get started, be aware two things are going to happen. First, there's going to be a spiritual battle. You're going to think, ooh, I'm this. And this is what I want. This is what God has for me. Then you're going to hear the voice that tells you why you can't. Got to recognize that spiritual battle is there. And then the second thing, Paul said it pretty well. He only fought the good fight. He didn't fight the perfect fight. You're going to make mistakes. It's not going to be perfect. All you have to do, I've got a lot of friends in my world that have had babies lately, and they're posting their first steps and their first crawls and their rollovers. And it's hilarious watching a baby try and roll over, and they can't do it, and then all of a sudden they do it. But they didn't quit after the first time. So you've got to recognize that you're going to fail, and that's part of the growth. You follow those three steps, and it's going to give you a clearer picture of what God has for you. Because I believe with all my heart, you, me, all of us, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. God didn't make us on accident. And He's got plans for every single one of us. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to lean in and find out? I just gave you the 3 steps. So let me say a prayer for us. God, thank you for 2022 and today. Even though it's freezing outside, thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for putting us in a place where we can learn from each other, where we can think about you and think about the things you have for us and be reaffirmed that you do have a plan for us and be reaffirmed that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Thank you for putting us in that environment, God. And God, just ask you to just be near us. Let us know that you're near. As we try and figure out what those plans you have for us are and to figure out what our legacy is so that we can start living in that way. God, just let us know. Let each and every person know that you are near in some small way. In some small way, just let us know you're near. God, in your name we pray. Amen.